And when you learn sales and marketing, the rest of business can basically just be paid for. Like, I can hire an accountant, I can hire operations, I can hire all that stuff. If I'm really good at telling people what I do and getting money in the door, I can figure everything else out. So
what is going on, everybody? It's Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkost with another great episode of the Big Picture Blueprint, which I really enjoyed today's show. But before we get into introducing our guest, Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. It's a little cold here. It's only like 62 degrees, so I'm struggling, but I think I'll make it through.
I am looking at the corner of my screen where it says weather alert in effect. We've gotten like 6 inches of snow in the past 4 hours. And it's going to be painful to get out of the house and go play pickleball later because I am officially, 30 and turning into an old man very, very quickly. But enough about me. Dan, why don't you tell us about the guest we had on the show, which you and I basically got a free hour of consulting for sales management today.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. We had Ajay Sharma. He's got about 5 years of experience in the land investing space, from infill lots, rural recreational tracts, desert squares, you name it, he's done it. And he uses that hands-on experience doing assignments, double close, subdivides, entitlements to run his not only operation, but also his sales training business. So he helps other land investors close more deals, and his stuff is good, man. I'm going to have my sales guys listen to this. Ajay knows how to close deals. So if you're in any sort of role where you're negotiating with people, absolutely listen to this because his advice is spot on.
Awesome. So I'll bring him in. Mr. Ajay Sharma. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm living the dream, Mason. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. I know you're out in the Dallas area, and I think you guys just got snow recently. How was that for a Texan?
That's right, man. And it's funny. So I've only lived in DFW for just under 2 years now. So I'm a Midwesterner at heart. I was born and raised Midwest in like the Chicago, Indiana area for most of my life. So I'm not foreign to snow. I think the funniest thing for me, man, is watching everybody down here who doesn't know how to drive in just like a dust, right? So it was interesting. Aside from, the infrastructure being making me a little nervous, it was a good time overall, right? Just a little bit of snow on the ground. We were trapped in the house for a bit, but nothing too crazy, thankfully.
I love it. Yeah, it's funny seeing these guys with their big trucks, but they're all two-wheel drive trucks being perfect to drive whenever it dusks a little bit. But
exactly.
Ajay, why don't we take a little bit of time for you to tell us about who you are, where you're from, where you got started kind of in your career, and where you are now with your business.
Totally. So great question, Mason. For background, I am a super young, 26 years old, rocking in land, which I love. I got started pretty much right out of college. So I graduated from Indiana University in 2022, and I started working corporate. It was, if you guys remember sort of what was going on spring, fall of 22, it was not a time for socializing. And so with all that, all the lockdown stuff, again, I was in Chicagoland at the time. I didn't have a social life, didn't have anything to do. I was working this W-2. I'm not going to lie, I got 6 weeks in before I got bored. And I was like, I got to do something, right? And so out the bat, just was like, I've always been interested in real estate. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was 19. I think that's a lot of people's gateway into some form of real estate investing. Rentals didn't make sense to me. I didn't know how to raise money. I was like, I can save up money for a year to buy a rental to make $300 in cash flow. I don't think this is my ticket, And so found vacant land through my now good friend, Seth Williams over at RE Tipster. Love Seth, can never shout enough praises at him. He's an awesome guy. But I bought his course, sent out my first mailer a week later, got a deal, and that sort of started my career. So bought a small lot in Wisconsin for $3,000. I ended up selling it for about 15, pocketed about 9 after realtor fees, trash removal, random stuff like that, title fees, back taxes. And that was my start. And so after about a year and some change, I got to a place where I was able to quit and go full time. And yeah, I've just been full-time land investor since. That was back in 2022. So full-time for about 3 years, part-time for almost 5. total. So it's been a crazy journey just seeing, I mean, I'm sure you guys know just all the different trends we've seen in land over the past 5 years. Getting to use different tools. You know, I've double closed, I've done assignments, I've done subdivides. We just finished up our first entitlement. So I've done a little bit of everything. We're dabbling in distressed acquisitions now. And, you know, have scaled up teams, have scaled down teams, tried all marketing channels. So, man, it's been a ride is what I'll say. That's probably more than you wanted to know, but it's been a lot of fun, a lot of learning, and I'm an open book with anything I've learned.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that I didn't realize how young you were. You know, Dan and I are both pretty young. I did turn 30 last year, so now I'm old. And
I don't know if you can say you're pretty young anymore.
else. I feel like I'm over the hill now. Dan's still like in his 20s still, I guess. But Ajay, I think something I really love discussing with entrepreneurs, especially those with you know, undergrad or graduate degree, is, I mean, Indiana University, it's a great school, and you started off kind of the corporate W-2 route like so many of us have. Do you regret having gone to a university for 4 years and started the, you know, corporate route with the knowledge now that you took a course from Seth, which we love Seth, and we've, you know, all taken different courses and offer courses and all that kind of stuff too, but probably cost a lot less than a undergraduate education. Do you regret going to school or do you not? And how has that applied and benefited you or not benefited you in your business?
For sure. Such a good question, Mason. So, man, I've got a really sort of unique journey. I guess everybody has their own unique journey. We're all snowflakes, right? But man, it's tough to answer that with like a blanket yes or no. And here's why. For some background, man, I grew up a little bit rougher than most. You know, we were at one point Section 8 food stamp sort of situation. My dad left my family when I was 9 years old. We were basically homeless, moved in with an uncle. Mom almost went bankrupt. Like it was, you know, kind of a messy thing. She pulled herself up by the bootstraps, figured it out, got us to middle class by the time I was in high school, which is awesome. But when you go through that kind of thing as a kid, it comes with a lot of scars, right? And so when I got to college, I mean, I'm the first person in my family to get a bachelor's degree from anywhere. And so it's funny. I mean, we as entrepreneurs talk about a lot of the mental unwiring we have to do. I've had to do that at multiple levels and continue to. I mean, I came from super broke. Like my mom's like a sick couponer, man. If you ever go to CVS with her, she will walk out of there with like a cart full of stuff for like $1.27. It is incredible, right? But that's where I started, right? So then fast forward, I got to college and I had a combination of financial aid and some scholarships. So I ended up not having to come out of pocket a ton outside of some books. So, you know, tuition was paid for. I even got some scholarships that helped pay for rent in a couple latter years. So it gave me some breathing room just while I was in college. I got the bubble, but I was just around people that came from upper middle class families. Okay. So I came from broke, couponer type lifestyle. And then college let me sort of see that I could have a different path, at least into what I thought was rich, which was upper middle class, right? That's keeping up with the Joneses, you know, a nice, I guess in today's market, maybe a $600,000 house, 2 cars, 2 kids, white picket fence, whatever, right? So I'm like, okay, this makes sense. But man, I've always had this wiring where I knew I wanted bigger. I knew I wanted more for my life, which led me down the path where eventually I'm reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I just knew I'd be different. And, you know, I think the first time in college, I knew that I was different was my internship after sophomore year of college. I was interning at Cummins, you know, the big power company. They stick engines in trucks is why most people know them, but they also do generators and a bunch of other stuff I had no idea of until I interned with them. Great company based in Indiana. But I remember I was 19 years old, younger than all the other interns there. And I was like, hey, how is success measured as an intern? Was a question I asked in 19. Is like, how do I know if I did a good job? And it was like, well, at the end of the summer, you're going to present on all the projects you completed. And I'm like, okay, is that measured based on impact or the number of projects? And they said, well, both. I said, great. So the average intern in a summer gets, you know, 2 to 3 projects done. I'd finished that summer with 7 projects under my belt, all that had massive, massive impacts for like my direct manager who I was reporting to, where I like found efficiencies. I learned how to code in VBA macros just to like automate some of her job and all this stuff. And I know this is a long story here, but I promise it's got a point. So
Oh, keep going. It gives us insight, everything.
Totally. And so I get to the end of that, and I remember coming back to my peers junior year of college, and I was like, man, I smoked everyone. Like I did 3 times the output of an average intern. I had 5 teams that wanted to recruit me, and then found out I had 2 more years left of school. They thought I was graduating that year and wanted to give me a job offer. And I was like, I got paid the same as the rest of those interns. That kind of sucks. And all my peers were like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, I worked harder and did not get paid more. I feel like I should be paid more if I get worked harder. And they were like, that's not how this works. And immediately I was like, disconnect, man. That's not how it works for you. I'm going to figure something out here. Right. So I knew I was different after that summer internship. And I kind of stayed on the route. I ended up switching majors a bunch because I started as finance because I thought finance is where you made money. I found out finance is just where you learn how to track money. A lot of those guys end up just going corporate finance, which is super boring. I just didn't want to be a glorified spreadsheet monkey. And so, some of those guys go off to like investment banking and they sell their souls. Wasn't my route. So I actually studied entrepreneurship in college. It was one of the few programs in the country that has a pretty decent entrepreneurship program, which sounds crazy. I have a foundation of like business vocabulary because I went to business school. And I took a couple accounting courses, which really help. I mean, gosh, you guys understand difference between profit and cash flow in this business. It's pretty crazy pretty quick. I took 4 accounting classes and I was an accounting tutor in college, and I still scratch my head sometimes. And I'm like, where's the money? Right? On paper, I made hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit, and in my bank account, I don't see that reflected. Right? So it's a good running joke. We're all dirt rich at some level, right? But my whole point here is like, man, I don't regret going to college because it actually helped me sort of get to my next step. I don't know that I would have been able to eventually break out into entrepreneurship had I not had that step. I will say, though, I think for the average person, if you know you want to be an entrepreneur, you're going to learn so much more by just getting out there and getting it done. Like if I could go back to my former self, and let's say I clean slate was a robot, white slate, and we just needed to make me the entrepreneur I am today. Yeah, it'd be a lot faster if I'd started just like with a high ticket sales job or a door-to-door job even, right? Selling pest control or solar or something. I think I would have got my reps a lot quicker. And when you learn sales and marketing, the rest of business can basically just be paid for. Like I can hire an accountant, I can hire operations, I can hire all that stuff. If I'm really good at telling people what I do and getting money in the door, I can figure everything else out. So to answer your question, yes and no. 7-minute answer here,
That was perfect. And I'll pass it to Dan because I think you and I could have a long conversation about that.
Go for hours. Ajay, the question's fun for us to ask because Mason went to a nice school, made some good connections, has really benefited from it. I worked full-time through college. I paid for it myself, and that is probably one of the only things I legitimately regret. It was absolutely worthless. The job I worked, I remember graduating, and I already had a middle-class income. I thought, why the heck did I go to school? These people didn't know anything. I learned a lot from running a business, managing someone else's. And so we have very different experiences. And so it's just fun to ask guests that. And I enjoyed hearing about your background because I grew up in a cornfield in Ohio, very familiar with Chicago. I had extended family in Chicago and around the metro.
Oh, cool.
And Elgin, LaGrange, if you know where the...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, when you mentioned the penny pinching, I used to get in trouble as a kid if I would use too many paper towels when I was doing.
Oh, man. Same.
The towels were very expensive, and I still make this joke. My brother and I always tease my parents about this now because things are different, 20 years later. But yeah, paper towels were a hot commodity because they were so expensive. So I definitely felt a lot of what you were saying there. So. Anyways, not to go off topic and make this about me, thank you for sharing that, and we appreciate the more extensive answers so we know where you're coming from. Now, today, right, you've got your land business going. You referenced some of what you're doing. What does your business look like? Are there different arms to it? Is it all just focused on buying and selling land? What all are you doing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dan. It's funny, man. The past 6 months have been sort of a rebuild for us. 2024 was a very unique year in a lot of ways. I think we all can recognize Dispo got harder and more competition came into the scene. So we hit growth mode in Q1, which for those that don't know, that means we hired a bunch of people and we spent a lot of money on marketing. And then it took 6 months for us to get $1 back and a lot of that investment. And so I don't, I'm a talking head on the internet, but I don't like to hide. We got in a bad cash flow crunch. And the timing was less than fortunate because I also got married this past year. So have a beautiful wife. Her name is Erin. Love her to death. She's such a blessing. We got married in June and we took a 2-week honeymoon in Italy, and it was awesome. And I came back and we had not sold a lot of property and we had spent a lot of money. Okay. So I went through my first season of layoffs right after I got back from the honeymoon, which is like not a fun season to enter into. You know, I'm learning how to be a husband. We're pretty traditional. And so we moved in together after we got married, and tons of learning that comes from that stuff. I don't know if you guys are married. Mason, I see you've got a ring on your finger. Dan, I don't know if you are, but okay. Well, there's just tons of learning that has come from that stuff. I mean, I feel like we could do a whole podcast on stuff I've learned in the first 7 or 8 months of marriage, and it would go on for hours. But all that to say, we hit that point in July, and man, we just realized the numbers just didn't make sense. I mean, you know, I was able to make up for some of it. Like as soon as I came in, here's the thing is I understand sales and marketing. So I'm like, cool, man, I'll hop on the phones for acquisition and dispo. And don't get me wrong. I mean, we brought money in right away, but I have to ask myself like, dude, is this the life that I want where I am like beating my head against the wall to make sure my team's payroll is met? Like, guys, that sucks. That sucks. Right. And I think a lot of us have been there and not enough people talk about it. I know, Mason, before we jumped on, you were like, hey, dude, this audience is more advanced people. Well, sweet, man. If we're doing 201, 301 here, like you guys got to understand cash flow if you're going to try to scale up your land business. Land is sweet because the margins are fat and the sellers generally don't care as much compared to other asset classes. But a lot of that is because it is also not very liquid. And a ton of us were super spoiled that came in like 2021 and 2. Like those years were gravy years for selling property. Guys, this is still a sick business, okay? But I'm just encouraging a lot more people to either be lean or to have a very good cash reserve. I mean, guys, we started 24 with 6 figures in cash. It wasn't like I came in and had like 19 grand in the bank and was like, yeah, let's scale it up. You know what I mean? So, it was on the lower end of 6 figures, but I thought we were scaling smart and we still got our butts beat, right? And so anyways, to answer your question here, Dan, we decided to take a step back and enter into a little bit of a vacuum. We actually stopped all paid marketing for a little bit and laid off all of our overseas staff. I loved them, and it was really tough to do that. But our decision was based on my American staff. The 3 staff we have are just insanely talented. I mean, I could throw almost any problem at them and they'll just figure it out. And like anybody, like guys, when you're growing businesses, good people are just the backbone of being able to grow any business. And so, you know what? We just tested some things out. We started with some on-market subdivides. We actually executed, we made about 500 offers to a deal is what we see on market, or 500 offers to get a deal for like a multi 6-figure subdivide deal that was on market. We just pulled off a sick deal. We did an on market subdivide double close. So we had found this deal on market, subdivided it, and then double closed on 6 child parcels of the 12 that we had made the same day we bought it. We only had to bring 100 to the closing table, and we had all the buyers lined up throughout this month. So we're going to end up netting about 180 on that deal. So that was fun. So we're doing some of that. We're doing some JV deals. I do some sales training and I've got some branding. So deals just hit my desk a lot because of that. So we do some JV deals. And right now, we're dabbling in distressed acquisitions. So all 4 of us on my team, and I say 4, we've got 5, but one's my executive assistant, Kaylee, who is not a like production role, right? She's operations. So the rest of us are all acquisition, dispo, sales, something. But the 4 of us are all cold calling potential heirs and wrapping that stuff up. So we're doing a little bit of everything. I'm not going to lie and pretend like we've right now got a business where we're doing massive amounts of sales and marketing. I understand sales really well, which gave us the comfort to say, I don't care what channel, I don't care how it's going to happen. We're always going to get deals. It's funny, even from old marketing, we lock up about a contract a month pretty consistently just from like follow-ups and, you know, old leads that have hit the desk. And so despite us not having done a ton of paid marketing in the past 6 months, we're still doing very regular deal flow. I mean, you know, we had a multi 5-figure net month in January and it's not over. We're on track for maybe a low 6-figure net month in February. And again, like we haven't been doing a ton on the acquisition side. So it's been interesting. And some of that is also just sell off of big projects that we had bought, that are finally coming full cycle. right? So there's a bunch of layers there, and I am happy to speak to any of that if you guys have clarifying questions. I like to keep all this stuff super open book.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate you being transparent there, because I was at a workshop on Friday with some of the big names everyone would recognize, and man, they had rough years last year. They didn't go broke, but they had rough years, and I think a lot of people did. And it's interesting. The first 10 months of the year were really good for me, but then the last 2 really slowed down. But being able to pivot, I don't think there's anyone that's been in business for decades or any extended period of time that hasn't had to pivot at some point. So you moved into subdivides, so you're going after distressed properties. What are you looking at through the rest of the year to make sure that those keep coming to fruition? If you're not doing much marketing, what are you controlling, amongst the factors that you can control to keep that pipeline flowing so you can repeat this strong start to the year that you've had?
Totally. Great question. So the short answer is on the on-market subdivide side, we get a bunch of stuff through referrals. We got good relationships with agents. A lot of it though is just like our own spotting, like when you do deals in certain markets long enough, you kind of get an eye for stuff. If you talk to John Jasniak, who's a friend of mine, he's got a huge Instagram account, owns Cornudas. That guy is relentlessly on land.com. He'll spot a deal faster than anyone I know if he sees an on-market deal somewhere. And 90% of the stuff he does is on market. So part of it is just like, your stuff, your markets, you pop on Zillow and land.com for 10 or 15 minutes a day and you'll find stuff, it's slow is the thing. Like, that's what I tell people when they jump in. They're like, hey, dude, I want to start doing on-market subdivides. I'm like, hey, that's great. I would tell you, pick somewhere that's got good minor exemptions, like a Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, one of the Carolinas, Tennessee, right? Arizona. Those all have some pretty good exemptions. Do your own homework. I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice, right? But I would start there, hit markets first, because you can kind of get a gauge on pricing pretty quickly. If you've got buyers lists and agents, that's all bonus. So that stuff just kind of like hums and haws along, Dan. On the distress side, I'm not going to lie, we're newer right now. Okay. So we've been we're sitting here January 28th. I made my first call, our first outreach into distress stuff 2 weeks ago from yesterday. And it was kind of crazy. I'll tell you, my first heir that I spoke with, my first phone call, I actually got a verbal where I was supposed to buy $1,000. I was going to give this lady $1,000 to buy an 83% interest in her $200,000 home, which is pretty nuts. And then she ghosted me. Which, guys, like I literally train land investors on sales and sales training. I've been call reviews for other investors and their teams for years. That's part of it, right? So I've sent her a bouquet of flowers. I've called her off another number where she ended up picking up. And we've had conversations. So I'll tell you what, when she is ready to sell, she's going to sell to me, because otherwise she's losing this house to a foreclosure. Aside from that, my team's just building up the pipeline right now. So we're all actively making calls. We're pretty new, so I don't want to try to share metrics because podcasts live forever. This is going to go out into the internet. If I start dropping numbers that I'm like, in the 2 weeks of data that I've got, here's what we're looking to do and here's what I think we'll do. But man, this stuff lives forever, so I try not to share that stuff until I'm confident in it. You know what I mean?
No, I think all of it's great. And I want to reiterate what Dan said of Ajay. We really appreciate the transparency here, because we've all felt it. Like end of Q3, beginning of Q4 2024, I think I paid off $900,000 in private notes with my own cash for deals that hadn't closed as quickly as we anticipated. Granted, with that being said, like, we're under contract to sell close to $1 million in gross revenue in land, which is a metric that people tell other people to inflate their ego. What we're all talking about and what we're focused on as business owners is EBITDA, or earnings before income taxes, depreciation, amortization, blah blah blah. But I think that last question kind of pivots us to a good opportunity where I think we want to take a lot of the show from my own self-interest, which is the sales training stuff.
For sure.
So I'm a really systematic thinker. I'm a really operations focused person. Before this, I was CEO of a hospital. So like very focused, of how everything connects from the right paperwork at a patient's admission to the documentation for how the patient stay and everything associated with it. So I'm newer to sales. I've, only been doing sales for the past 4 years or so.
Okay.
So I try to approach sales as a system. with the avatar that a majority of the people deal with in this business, which is typically an older demographic, typically it's not distressed within the land flipping space.
Totally.
How have you built out systems within your company prior to whenever you were really focused on it, and that you recommend to people to have a systematic approach to sales?
Yep. Okay. So if I understand you right, sort of like what's the suggestion for building out framework and process for sales?
Yeah, perfect. What much more concise.
Yes. No, I get so many types of questions on sales and sales training. So I'm always like, I want to make sure I answer this right, because man, I've got like just a deep library, and as you guys have come to know in the 26 minutes we've had together, I can talk, so it's dangerous to let me go.
No, perfect. Well, and Ajay, I've sent my sales guide to you. He's been listening to all your stuff as
sweet.
well. So this is for him. This is for
a lot of
fun of the podcast is interviewing people where we get a free consulting hour basically.
It's funny how that stuff works, man. Anybody in the audience that doesn't know, that's what a lot of this stuff is for. Like, you can connect with way more people when you give them an audience and a platform. It is pretty crazy. But okay, so to answer your question here, Mason, I like to focus on three main things. Like when I coach people, when I do sales training for teams, I'm focused on three main buckets to make sure we're all looking at this from a process perspective, right? And I'll even take a step back. Like my goal as a coach, sales trainer, whatever you want to call me, I have to make sure my clients get results, right? So like I lose sleep at night if people give me money and they don't make more because of it, right? And I would imagine the vibe I get off you guys, you're pretty high integrity guys, probably very similar, right? You give somebody your word, you want to deliver. And so because of that, I've been forced to make sure I can do this in a way that is process. So a lot of people try to say like, oh man, sales, you just build a little rapport and go in. And it's like, no, man, that's not true. That's not the reality. I've looked at probably hundreds of land investors teams, and I could tell you the themes I've seen in successful ones, how we've gotten people to like triple their contracts in a 45-day time horizon with the exact same lead flow. I mean, I've got stories for days on this stuff. Okay. And so here's what I'll tell you, Mason, is it's three main buckets that I focus on. The first one is really, and this is going to be like a little foo-foo for a second, just bear with me, but we're going to talk KPIs for just a quick second here, right? Our key performance indicators. Within my KPIs, I want a couple of things noted. Number one, we've got to have standardized language with them. When I say net leads and you hear net leads, are we talking about the same definition? When I say offer and you hear offer, are we talking about the same definition? And here's an example of that. If I'm talking to Dan, right, and I say, okay, Dan, what are you looking for on the property? And he says $70,000. And I'm like, okay, cool, man. All right, well, let me talk to the team, see if I can get back to you. And then I text you, hey, Dan, we can get you 35. That's not an offer. In my book, I consider an offer a verbal offer I make to a seller. I don't care if it's text, email, mail, carrier pigeon. I do not care. It is not an offer if you did not verbally make one over the phone. And people ask me all the time, they're like, why can't I just make one over email, text, whatever? And I'm like, dude, because you can't get feedback. Do you know how easy it is to block someone or ignore them when I'm not on the phone with them? Right? So you're going to hear this a lot when I'm talking here for the next 30 minutes, but a lot of my thesis and everything I talk about is I reverse engineer what's my desired outcome. My desired outcome is a signed purchase agreement at a price that I like. Okay. Now, there's a ton of assumptions built into that. We can talk about that another time. Now, if I'm reverse engineering that, I have to say, with every action I take along the way, what is going to boost my probability of achieving my desired outcome, which is signed contracts. That's how you deem successful acquisition manager, right? And I have to add that caveat of prices we like, because otherwise people just go get in contracts and it's a whole thing, right? Okay, so we're going to come back to KPIs. Number one, what are the ones you manage? I recommend like 5.5. And I always say half because the sixth one is like important, but typically not until an investor's been doing this for a couple of years, right? So I like to look at gross leads, which are leads that come into your pipeline, net leads, which are qualified leads at some level, meaning it's not a lead that told you stop calling me. It's a property that I want to buy, and it's somebody I was able to get back on the phone with. Those are our definitions of a net lead, right? Now my lead manager talks to them, qualifies them, calls the property. That's a net lead, okay? After that, how many verbal offers do I make? Right? How many sellers, how many Dans am I talking to where I say, hey, dude, I can give you 35 Gs, right? And I wouldn't do it like that. There's tons of nuance there. But it's how many offers am I making? How many of those get a verbal acceptance where Dan tells me, yeah, Ajay, let's work together. Okay, yeah, we'll do 35, right? After that, how many of those, yeah, we'll do 35s actually get signed? Because All three of us on this call know just because somebody tells us yes does not mean they sign on the dotted line. In fact, that's a whole chase, right? And so, and the relationship of every single one of these tells me a story. Now that sixth one, that 5.5, that's deal done, because it's a really important metric, especially if you're doing some double closings, where like even the best people I know doing double closings don't get more than 70% of those deals done. So as you're forecasting your revenue, you've got to be very mindful of how long it takes to monetize a contract and what percentage of acquisitions that I get under contract actually get to the closing table, right? So now that I've got standardized KPIs, what gets measured can be managed, right? Between me and my teams, right? If I work for Dan, if Dan is my sales manager and he asks me how many offers do you make, and I'm like, I texted these 3 people and I talked to this guy, but his asking price was high. Sweet dude, 0. You made 0 offers today, right? Which is brutal to say to some people, but we got to make sure we're speaking the same language. And now I've got eyes on this, right? I'll tell you too, I recommend with all my reps, you don't want to give more than 7 metrics to any individual. I say 3 to 5 is a sweet spot, because whatever numbers you tell them to report, you communicate, hey, this is important. If every single day the only number I submit to Dan is either offers or contracts, which if you're going to do one, those are the 2 I like to focus on. I like offers because it's a controllable input, right? Versus a contract is a less controllable output. There are things you can do to boost your probability of getting that desired outcome, right? But offers are a controllable input if I've got leads. And if I don't have leads, that's a different can of worms, right? But anyone that's been in this business knows, dude, I can get leads tomorrow. I'll go drop a campaign for 5 cold callers, and I promise I'll have leads in my pipeline tomorrow, right? So you spend money, you get leads. Anybody that's been doing this for more than like 12 to 18 months understands that relationship at some level, right? So that's the KPI piece, okay? So I need to make sure we're speaking the same language, standardized language, and we're monitoring activities that are core activities that get me results, right? That's piece number 1. If I don't have that, it's really hard to do 2 and 3. 2 is now where we're going to talk about our actual sales process. And when I say sales process, that is a huge umbrella term, okay? Huge umbrella term. But that is a lead hits the pipeline. So if you came from big college success world, SLOs, right? You've got your service level agreements, Mason, where it's like, hey, what is our time to get back to this thing when something happens, right? So on our team, it's like if a lead hits our desk, we got 5 minutes. If I'm not on the phones in 5 minutes, that's an issue. But when a lead hits your pipeline, I need to know exactly what that outreach looks like, exactly how often that's hit, who owns that outreach. When does it get aged in the next thing? When is it deemed a successful, input at that level? And listen, I'm talking super high level. Let's get into some weeds, okay? So a lead hits a desk. I'm a big, big proponent of you triple dial that lead twice a day for 2 days. Is that aggressive? Yes. It only is aggressive if they don't answer my first couple of phone calls, though, right? So we're talking about probability of success. Is my probability higher or lower if I speak to my prospect? Higher, fair to say, right? Okay, great. Is my probability of speaking to a prospect higher or lower if I call them more times? Higher, right? So really simple foundational assumptions I've built into this stuff where I'm like, if I call more times, I'll talk to more people. If I talk to more people, I'll make more offers. If I make more offers, I will get more deals. Okay. So that's sort of how I've built out a lot of what I call my sales process. You also want successful outcomes in every single one of your phone conversations. So here's an example with a lead manager. Most people don't talk about what does a successful lead management call look like. I like to say I need 2 outcomes in every lead management conversation. Number 1 is a booked appointment for my closer, my acquisition manager. If that is you, if you are just like a one-man show, book an appointment for yourself, okay? If you booked an appointment, you did a good job. If you didn't, you failed on one of our success metrics, okay? That was one of our desired outcomes for that conversation. Number 2 is an asking price. So Dan has to tell me he wants 70 G's for that property. If he doesn't, I failed, okay? And what I'll say right here, and guys, you were getting a sweet masterclass right now, but what most people fail to do in that lead management call when they don't get the asking price is they just don't ask enough times, okay? So let's think about this mathematically again. So you're a process guy, Mason, so I hope this hits hard with you, but it's like just probability speaking. Will somebody tell me a thing if I ask more times, right? I like to say they either get worn down or fed up. That's your two options. You're either going to wear them down or they're going to get fed up and be annoyed with you, right? But if Dan tells me, well, negotiations, I want you to go first. Okay. Oh, well, you called me. Great. I've got some scripting for that, right? So, and we could talk about that stuff in the third bucket in a second. But my point here just being lead management conversation, I need to get an asking price. I need to get a booked appointment. I get asking price if I go for the ask more times. Typically, when there's friction on asking price, I see we've got to ask for it 3 to 5 times, right? You ask a couple more questions, then you ask again in a different way. You go a more indirect route, right? And now it's a successful metric. And people might ask, like, why does that matter? I can do that on the closing call. Well, dude, I'll tell you what. I had a lead that hit my desk a few years ago, 80 acres in Calhoun County, Florida. I still remember it. And this lead hit the desk, and the seller said, I want 160. I look at the comps, and it's worth 200, 240 all day. I'm like, I don't know about you guys, but I wake up for 30 grand when it hits my desk. Okay. At a minimum, right? I'm like, I like 30 grand. When the seller tells me, yeah, I'll give you 30 grand, I'm going to call them. That's how I view that. Okay. A seller tells me they want to give me $30,000 by that asking price. That's how I perceive that. So I'm going to call. Well, he stops picking up all of a sudden. And I'm like, what happened? Right. So my team asks me, Ajay, we've been calling for 2 weeks. And Mr. Price has not answered the phone. How long do we follow up? And I say, Veronica, we follow up until either he dies or we die, whichever happens first. And if he dies first, we have a great probate attorney in Florida. Okay. So, it's a little cheeky, but my point here is if I get a verbal on that lead management call, or an asking price, right? Now I have the ability to follow up much more aggressively than I would a standard lead otherwise. So all it does is it just gives me an opportunity to laser in on properties where I know I have a deal. Okay. So, allowing that allowed us to follow up with that lead every day for 3 months. This guy finally calls us back. It's my direct line, calls me and is like, Ajay, every year I go to a remote cabin in Alaska for 2.5 months. I turn off all my devices. I got out. I have more calls and voicemails from your team than my entire family put together. He's like, all right, clearly you guys are serious. I'll give you my business. We ended up listing it on the market, got an offer for $230 in 3 days. We had a realtor involved. We netted, we got a $58,000 wire back is what we got. So basically takes us no time to follow up when you don't get a pickup. 60 seconds, right? Maybe less. And we ended up making $58,000, right? So seller told me I want to give you $30,000. That's my perception. I called him back until he finally gave me the 30,000. 30 turned into 58. It was a great day. Okay. So that's why we've got outcomes for some of this stuff. I've engineered it all to just boost probabilities, right? If you're a mathematical thinker in any way, like this stuff should make sense. I'm going to pause because I've been talking for like 10 minutes straight before I get to the third bucket when we're talking process for sales. What questions do you guys have for me?
No, I think this is super great. And we're very fortunate to get to hear it. And everyone that's listening is very fortunate to get to hear it, which is why people should join Ajay's community. But a quick question, and then back to, kind of the third point that you're making.
Sure.
Is at the beginning, or say the middle, say you're about a year into this land flipping business. Do you feel like the importance should be a focus on volume within those lead metrics you're talking about, or improvement in efficiency to convert more of those potential or, net leads, gross leads into qualified leads or net leads, or however you kind of framed it there?
Yep.
What do you feel like the focus should be?
Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 answers. The first one is your typical business entrepreneur. It depends. Okay, and it really just depends on budget, Mason. So like if somebody's only got 10 grand to their name, like, I don't know, man. I'm not going to tell you to go increase your lead flow because you've only got, like, that's not a lot of money. I hate to say it, right? When we got in this back in 2020, 10 grand was plenty of money to get started in this business, right? You send out 1,000 mailers. Like I would send out 1,000 mailers and blind offers and I'd make 20 grand every time. And I wish I did it a lot more. I wish I just understood math back then and spent every penny I had on mail because I'd have a lot more of a net worth than I do now. But you know what? Hindsight's 2020, right? So first answer is it depends on budget. If you've got a lot of money, yeah, I would say jack that up a decent amount until it's just an uncontrollable mess, more or less, right? Because you're just going to get good shots on goal. The second one, though, is my second answer is if you're getting less than 30 leads a month, like you need to crank up output. because especially like so many newbies are kind of stuck in like a flip game, I feel like, and it still works. We still get properties at flip prices. Okay. But they're a lot more rare than they used to be. And when I say flip prices, I mean like 40 to 50 cents on the dollar, right? I mean like a double your money type of land deal. And to do those, like you just need to be making enough offers, and you just straight up cannot make enough offers if you're getting less than 30 leads in your pipeline every month. I mean, guys, we're talking like 10 a week, less than that, right? 7 a week if you're working 22 days in a month, right? So yeah, there's the number piece kind of on the bottom. If you're under 30, you got to do something to crank it up. Do something cheap. I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice. Watch out for TCPA compliance. Do something cheap like RVMs. Get a dialer yourself if you need to. Text messages, super cheap, right? There's ways to do this stuff cheap. But I think if you are well over that and you want to tighten things up and you have some staff, then yeah, start investing in this stuff. You know?
Yeah, I think that's an important point to drive home for a lot of the people that are getting started, especially those coming from the W-2 and engineering, mindset of you're so focused on efficiency and improving so whenever you're able to scale that you can handle it. It's like, dude, you haven't done a deal yet. You don't need to worry about your 100th deal if you haven't done one yet. So no, I appreciate that insight. And back to our regular scheduled programming with bucket number 3, Ajay.
Bucket number 3, baby. So bucket number 3 is like quite literally your scripting, right? So, and gosh, I have to be so careful when I use the word script because it makes a lot of people's skin crawl. And it's, I think because you hear the word and you associate it with telemarketers that are cold and reading off this lifeless script, right? So there's so many pieces in that. But here's the thing, as somebody that has done a lot of sales training, is a script is a framework. It is a tool, and it is meant to serve whoever is on the phone. It's the same way, and I'm going to make this parallel, and maybe this sticks, maybe it doesn't. I'm a Christian, and so like the Bible, I think, is a really good example where like it's the same view of viewing it as a rule book versus like a framework, right? Like my view as a Christian is God made people. Do you think he knows more about what makes a good life than me? Probably. I have been alive for 26 years. He is timeless and has seen many people come and go. If I check this out and follow rules, I mean, don't commit adultery, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. If I do those things, will I live a better life objectively, even if you are not a faith-based person? Yeah. Okay. So scripts, very similar in the sense that, not that I'm trying to compare myself to God here. Okay. But I just mean it's a really good metaphor that makes sense in my head. It is a tool that if I follow this, I will have a more successful outcome, right? Like the way I wrote my script, I've got a couple different buckets. It starts with openers. Where you begin a call really sets momentum, right? How do I set this so it makes sense? How do I write things in so I don't get common objections? Here's 2 big ones I hear all the time when I do call reviews, okay? I'm sure you guys have gotten these. Number 1, well, you called me. Right? You hear that all the time when we try to ask them questions. Typically the question is like, hey, what are you looking for on the property? Right? Or why are you thinking about selling? Those are 2 common ones. And they say, well, you called me, you tell me. Right? Another one I hear a lot is, hey, Mason, it's Ajay. I'm from XYZ company calling about your property. And they're like, cool, what's your offer? Right? And those are 2 conversation killers. Right? So in my scripting, I've built in ways to go around that so it doesn't come up. Right? I talk about framing, which is setting an agenda for the call in the first few seconds. I need to be asking questions, right? So that I'm driving conversation. Hey, Mason, it's Ajay. Did I catch you at a bad time? You're gonna be like, no, wait, who are you? Hey, man, I'm calling with Assets for Acres about your 10-acre property in Calhoun County. You mentioned to call you back at 3:00 today. Is now a bad time? You still have 10 minutes to chat? Well, yeah, I've got 10 minutes. Okay, great, man. So the purpose of this call, I got to confirm a couple of details. We'll get into some information, and then we'll see if we can work on numbers. Then we'll talk numbers and see if it makes sense. Then we'll get into an offer. Then we can make an offer on the property. Sound good? You got 10 minutes? Yes? Great. But see right there, I told him, I got to do this, and then we'll talk offer, right? And very seldomly now will a seller respond, oh, what's your offer, right? And so I just told them, hey, I got to do this first, right? So like 85, 90% of the time, we're good. There's always going to be 1 in 10 that just suck. I'm sorry. I can't fix everyone. Okay. Another one though is, well, you guys called me. So I love Eminem. I grew up listening to some Eminem, right? You guys see the movie 8 Mile? Oh yeah. sweet. So you know his rap battle at the end. I am white. I am an effing bum. I do live in a trailer with my mom, right? And then he hands the mic over and homeboy just doesn't have anything to rap against him with. So I've used scripting in the same light. If I know I'm going to get a talk track from a seller, I'm going to train for it and I'm going to call it out, right? So before I ask, why do you want to sell, Mason? I'm going to ask, hey, Mason, so I know that my team reached out to you, but can I ask, before we did, were you guys thinking about selling your property? See how different of a question that is? But it's going to get me the answer I actually want. Because now they're not going to say, well, you called me, you tell me. I already said that. I already said I know we called you, right? Instead, they're going to actually give me an answer. So my point here is that scripting is meant to say, hey, here's a framework that we follow to get this, ideal success. Here are the objections you're going to get. How do we ask questions so we don't get them? When do I ask this versus this, right? There's a timing piece to it. So, scripting is that big third piece in both your lead management and your acquisition management conversations. But here's where most people miss the mark, in my opinion. You can, I have a script for free in my free school community, right? Mason, I think you're in the school community. Dan, I don't know if you are. I can't remember if I saw your name or not, but I've got a free school community with 2 hours of recorded content. My script is in there. It's 7 pages long. I just gave it all away for free. Now, I use it as a marketing funnel. I'm not going to lie. And I have paid coaching. I'm not going to lie, but it is all there for free and you don't have to buy anything if you don't want to. Okay. I know a lot of people take that script and they just hand it over to their team. Okay. And it's like, now, dude, you can do that and you're going to get a better outcome than no script, right? But here's the big difference when it comes to hiring acquisition managers, AKA sales reps. I heard this phrase from Ren Bartlett, who's a consistent 8-figure revenue house wholesaler, and revenue being assignment fees. So like gross profits, not being, home sale prices. That would be a terrible metric. This guy sold 3 homes. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean, right? You hear people use all kinds of vanity metrics. But this guy's hired and fired dozens of people, had, hundreds on his staff. He had this expression. I really liked it. It goes, process is to be managed and people are to be coached. Process is to be managed and people are to be coached. Scripting is a process. There's a process within that script that we need to follow. There are things we need to do and listen for that need to be followed. But Dan, I don't know if you're following the script unless I listen to your calls. Right. And this is where we are accountable as business owners, as sales managers, whatever your role is. Right. And so on my team, I do a call review every single week. We've got a sales team meeting. Right. It took a little bit of a backseat when we sort of pivoted strategies, but I would meet with my acquisitions manager every single week, rain or shine. And we would listen to her calls, and the best calls to listen to are, hey, this is somebody you think you could have closed, but you just didn't know how to bring it to the finish line, or you hit some weird objection or something happened, right? Our biggest objection in this business is price. So if I get any other objection, my opinion is that can be worked through. Okay. And even in price, I think most people are terrible negotiators at some level. And I talk tons of negotiation talk tracks and all kinds of stuff. But my point being, scripting, super important. What words are you actually saying? Right? What are you listening for when a seller says something? Are you taking stuff a layer deeper when they give you information? Are you trying to understand their emotional drivers? After that, how are we managing that process and coaching up our people to adhere to that process? Because again, the average investor isn't even in my stuff, but regardless, average investor might just hand over a script to a team member and not train them on it, not do call reviews with them, not model what it sounds like to do good calls with them, right? There's a whole gambit of things you could be doing different. But I think call reviews are really where you start to set people apart. And again, I have trained teams one-on-one. I don't do a lot of one-on-one. I'm super picky with who I work with. But when I do, I've trained at teams and I, without fail, have seen people 3x their contracts in a 45-day window. Now, I'm not willing to stick that on a guarantee, but I will sit, because here's the thing is I always tell people when they are looking for a guarantee of some kind too, and I'm sure you guys get this kind of stuff all the time, where it's like, well, what kind of guarantee can you offer? And I'm like, dude, let me ask you a question. Who's in charge of your success? You or me? My job is to lead you. And if you take action on my advice, you'll get results. I know that, right? But I can't control you picking up the phone or you managing your team. And it's the same for you guys with your acquisition managers, right? This is a conversation I have when I hire, right? If Dan's hiring me, he should be asking, Ajay, who's in charge of your success? And I better answer me, because if I don't, you do not hire me, okay? I am not accountable and I will blame you when things don't go well, right? So that's a question I ask in my hiring. But the whole point there being, Process is to be managed. People are to be coached. The way that looks is you do regular call reviews. If you've never done call reviews, I suggest you do a ramp up. Before we got to a weekly cadence, I was doing 3 times a week for a period to help my team get ramped up, right? That frequency helps. But like anything, right? Like everything else we're talking about, there's a level of output that matters. Your team will get faster at a slower increment if you do it once a month versus if you do it 3 times a week. Very simple. I have found once a week being a pretty good sweet spot where they are mindful of their metrics, mindful of objections, and come to you where they're constantly thinking of ways to improve because they know, oh, Monday at noon, we're going to have our sales team meeting. So again, I went on a bit of a run there. I'm going to pause. What questions do you guys have for me?
Well, first, I just want to acknowledge how much I love that you used a reference to 8 Mile and how you yes, I grew up listening to Eminem too, and 8 Mile is a classic. So love that. That's very memorable, right? The concept that is very memorable using that illusion, or illusion, excuse me. But all right, we've only got like 9 minutes left, and I have so many questions. But you hit on one problem that I think is applicable to any people in sales. And you said you get to the point where someone accepts an offer, but they never sign the contract. You know, you gave the guy who went to Alaska that example. One of my guys has had this problem, especially recently. Okay? And we're working on, of course, sometimes it's just a matter of follow-up. And 2 months later, they come back, they sign the contract, you move forward. But a lot of times there's something you didn't address, something still bugging at them, a spouse or their ego, who knows. How or what have you found to be your best means of getting it over the finish line to actually get that contract signed and into escrow?
Yeah, great question, Dan. And gosh, I hate to say this, but the short answer is it depends. Okay. So I need to understand there's 2 ways to look at this. Number one is there an underlying objection we did not address, which you mentioned, right? There's 4 types of objections. I'm going to blitz through them as fast as possible. Okay. We've got certainty, which is a level of trust. They don't believe you're going to give them that desired outcome, that money that you're promising them, right? That's certainty. I've got partner spouse, which is husband, wife, brother, somebody else on title, somebody else they need to check with. There's another decision maker in the loop. That is partner spouse. Okay. Next, I've got timing. There's 2 types of timing. One is BS. One is event centric, is what I like to say. Right. I was doing a call review in our community yesterday where a gal was talking about how they were about to literally go on this trip to China. And I was like, I don't think there's anything you could have done to make them sign this agreement before they went to China. That is a timing-based objection. That is event-centric. I need to go get a date for when they get back and plan on a follow-up. Right. Send them a Chinese New Year card was also my recommendation. Neither here nor there. But timing-based objections. Is there an actual thing that wants to happen, or does 30 days just make them feel comfortable, right? Again, one is BS, one is event-centric. And then the last one is obviously price, okay? And so there's different ways to hit all of those. But the important thing here is, can we sniff out if it's one of those? And being able to pinpoint the objection gives you clarity on how to address it and overcome it, okay? So my first point here is if you have an objection, you basically don't have a verbal. Even if you do, right? And for the metric's sake, yes, if somebody agreed to you on price, you do have a verbal. But if you have an objection, you did a bad job as a closer, in my opinion. So I have a set of questions in my script. Go check it out. It's free. But sets of questions. How do I ask these before we talk price? Super important on timing. Now, let's assume there's not objection. Let's assume they just don't sign. That's a different issue, okay? So that is a function of sales process. Here are things we do to boost the odds proactively in our process to get stuff signed. Number 1, can I get a contract signed live? If I'm already on the phone with Dan, my odds of getting it signed with Dan are while he's hot, heavy, and has already said yes to me. So what I want to do is get an agreement in front of him as fast as freaking possible, right? If you can do Zapier integrations, so you can just plug some stuff in, zap, and you've got a contract, great. If you can't, pretend you've got a partner objection and take 5 minutes. Hey, Dan, I just need to put you on a quick hold to verify something with my business partner. I know you mentioned you had 10 minutes earlier. I like to re-cement that they told me they had time, right? Can I just put you on a 3-minute hold, man? Promise you won't go anywhere, right? And just to verify you are near a computer. Okay, sweet. Put you on hold. I'm going to draft that contract up as fast as possible. So have good contract process. Now I'm going to get back on the phone and say, hey, Dan, you did mention you were by a computer. Can you just verify that you got this contract in your email? And again, actually, I'm using the word contract right now. I would never use that in a sales call. Always call it an agreement. It's less scary. Okay. But hey, can you check out the agreement in your inbox? It should be in DocuSign. If you don't see it, maybe it's in spam. Oh, you do see it. Okay. Could you go ahead and click it? Great. Now, Dan, typically when we send these out, I just like to walk through them. So if you've got any questions, I can answer them while we're talking. Would it be okay if we just walk through this line by line while we're together? Right? Usually you don't get a ton of friction there. You walk through it. Dan, what questions do you have for me? No questions? Great. Can you just go ahead and hit that sign now button at the bottom then? See, I'm just walking them through the next steps. One of my favorite expressions I learned from one of my mentors, Jenny Hudspeth, is it's only a big deal if you make it a big deal. So if I'm like, hey, Dan, we're going to go through this contract together. I hope that's okay. Like now this is a big deal. You see what I mean? Versus if I just like have a conversation with you and walk you through steps, sweet dude, like if they get it, if they really don't have questions, they should just be able to sign it. Now, if they do have questions, they're not telling you, they're like, you're going to get some hesitation. I'm like, hey, Dan, listen, man, I'm not trying to make you do anything you're not comfortable doing. Typically, when somebody doesn't want to move forward right here, they've got some question or concern they're just not telling me. Would you mind me asking, what is it? Right. And I'm doing some things there with my tonality and my speed and all that stuff. And I'm trying to rush because we have a few minutes here left. Right. But my point here being, so there's proactive sales process approach, right? With objections ahead of price drops, still proactive with trying to just like walk them through to get that agreement signed sooner rather than later. If you can't do it live, set an appointment for later that day. Again, you want it as fast as possible. Okay. And then at the very end, if you had a conversation, you sent it out, fine. Maybe you've just got people you need to follow up with. Remember, your verbals are the highest probability of you doing business with somebody. They already agreed to your price. So I follow up with that lead every single day relentlessly. Okay. Triple dial them on a local area code, new phone number, and they will probably pick up. Okay. So that's my advice to you. Send them some flowers if you want, or some cookies, or something like that. My buddy Josh has this company, Creme de la Creme, and they do like cookie service, and that's super fun. They said they've gotten really good stuff with that. He sent me over a box, which was super nice. And me and my wife plowed through them, which I'm not proud of. But there's all types of things you can do for follow-up. Triple dial on your numbers. Send certain text messages. I think 2 of my go-to texts to get somebody to respond to something. Congratulations on selling your property. Almost always gets a response. They're very confused. They're like, wait, I didn't sell my property. Call them right then and there. Hey, damn, I'm so sorry, man. I guess I texted the wrong person. While we're chatting, actually, I've seen on my records, we chatted here. I think we had blah, 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 blah. Now you're back in, right? Number 2 is like a Chris Voss. Have you abandoned trying to sell your property? Have you given up? Have you given up on trying to sell your property? Right? A question like that. If you don't know who Chris Voss is, he wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. Phenomenal read if you haven't read it. So there's a couple of tools, tactics, frameworks, approaches, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff that we can hit you with. That's a Doctor Who reference for anybody that gets that. Did that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah. No, that was excellent. Thank you. I'm taking notes for conversations I'll have with my acquisition guys in the morning. So I appreciate it.
Well, Ajay, we're coming up at the end of this, and one question we ask all of our guests, and we'll give you time to tell everyone where they can find you and everything, is, are there any questions that we did not ask you that you wish we had asked you?
That's a great question, man. I think the biggest one would be something around just like timeline to success. I think we entrepreneurs, we're so optimistic, and we have to be, right? If you're not an optimistic entrepreneur, you should not be an entrepreneur, frankly, right? But because we're optimistic, we tend to set unrealistic expectations on time. And I think if you are just willing to commit to inputs like 3 times longer than you think you have to, I promise you will see results. Okay. Now it's got to be the right inputs. Make sure you're focusing on the right core activities, which brings us back to KPIs. But you think you need to make offers for 2 weeks, commit to, 3x that. You make 5 offers every day for 6 weeks. And I would be shocked if you didn't have a contract at some level. Like you either have to be the worst closer in the world, which honestly, I've heard some bad calls that get deals, guys. So you do enough of stuff and you'd be shocked in any market. I don't care how competitive it is, right? I think that would be the question that I guess I wish you guys had asked me, if that's the right question there.
No, I think that's great. And now that you're 26 and your prefrontal cortex is finished developing,
finally, right?
A lot of wisdom in that. But Ajay, this has been fantastic. Where can people find out more about you? Tell us more about the Land Closers Academy and what you've got going on, and everything else.
Much appreciated, man. So, quick plug for myself. Number 1, I'm pretty active on Instagram. You can follow me at Investing with Ajay. Active there. I do posts. I post a lot of stories. So feel free to follow me, DM me, whatever. Aside from that, I do sales training for land investors. So I help land investors close more deals. What that looks like is every Monday at 4 p.m. Central, we do a group call. And people can hop into that. They bring their acquisition managers into that. So I'm training your teams. It's like I'm a fractional sales manager. So that's been a lot of fun for me. I just started that up a couple months ago and it's been exploding. I didn't realize how much of a need it was for the niche, but it has been so much fun training up teams, and I love doing call reviews. So I'm having a ton of fun with that. That's the Land Closures Academy Inner Circle specifically. If you're not at a place where you can invest in some coaching, like I said, I did a ton of free resources in the school community, school being SKOOL, called Land Closures Academy. Check it out. I got scripts, hours of videos, some KPIs, like all types of stuff that'll at least help you get to, 0 to 1. Okay. And the last thing I'll say, because I'll just timestamp this real quick. We're talking on Jan 28. I know you said this will be out in the next week or two. I am doing a sales blitz for the first time. So I'm basically copying Eric Klein. I saw him do this. I went to one of his events and it was sick. So I'm doing this event that's free to any of my members. And if you want to come out, it's like a no frills event. Like I got a very basic conference room for the day. We're catering Chipotle. Like it is not fancy. Okay. But I want 50 people in the room. We're going to spend a few hours doing some sales training. And then we're going to be locking up deals live together. So I want people on the phones and I'll be giving them live feedback. I'll take over the phone for some people probably. That'll be February 28th here in Dallas. So 1 month from when we're talking today. I'm hoping to do one more later this year. And then I'll throw my big event that I did last year, the Land Scaling Summit in the fall. That date is still to be determined, but we're looking towards the end of September again. So that's all stuff on the radar, free resources to check out, paid resources if you're interested in learning quicker and implementing faster. If you want to hang out in person, I'm throwing a couple events this year. So check it out. I love this stuff. And thanks so much for having me on, guys. This has been a lot of fun. I could talk about this stuff for hours.
Oh, yeah. And the resources Ajay provides has been fantastic. We've adapted some of that into our business. So highly encourage you guys to check it out. And if you can make it to his event in Dallas, February 28th, there will be Chipotle, not Freebirds, not Qdoba, Chipotle. You heard it here first. And everyone, this is Mason McDonald with Dan Haberkost for the Big Picture Blueprint, signing off.